All modern DAWs such as Logic, Cubase, Ableton, and Pro Tools have democratized creativity and given people the freedom to create and release both album and broadcast-ready music content. Modern computers are amazingly powerful, and even touch devices like iPads can create great-sounding content. While it's true that technology such as an iPad has a touchscreen, one of the downsides to using a DAW is over-reliance on a mouse. While mouse technique is an important skill for any creative software, being overly reliant on a mouse can give the creative process a feel more akin to a word processor than a creative medium. One of the great things about being an instrumentalist, such as a brass player, a string player, a woodwind player, is the way your playing technique will allow you to animate the sound as it unfolds over time. This is also true about a hardware synthesizer, where one hand can play the keyboard and the other can manipulate controllers to change the timbre over time. While using a mouse in a DAW will also allow you to do this, it's my experience that using tactile controllers to animate different parameters of a sound will give you a more musical performance. It'll also speed up your workflow, as you can just reach for a knob or a slider instead of moving a mouse to click drag or draw a control change parameter. While there are quite a few hardware controllers out there that give you tactile control inside of a DAW, today I'd like to focus on using the Moog Sirin for that function. In this video, we'll go over 3 ways to incorporate Sirin inside of your DAW. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. If you want more content, please subscribe, and if you'd like to get notified, ring that bell. Thanks for watching, and let's get started. In order to use Sirin in my system, I've hooked up a USB cable to control all Midi functions, as well as audio cables to both the inputs and outputs of Sirin. The audio cables are patched into the appropriate inputs and outputs of my audio interface, where I can access them in Pro Tools. The first function is to just use Sirin as a hardware synth directly into the computer. I have a Midi track here, with the output assigned to Sirin, and an aux track with its inputs assigned to the input that the Sirin is plugged into. This way we can play and record Midi and have it play back through our system. Let's take a listen to this bass line I've recorded. What's nice about this is that you can record the notes first, and then once you've got your performance right, play it back, and using something like Midi Merge, overdub any Midi CC automation using the knobs on the Sirin. So let's take a look at that. Just playing around with the filter now. And let me play that back. We can see in this area here that this is the MIDI information we've just recorded. Once you've recorded it, you can go back in and touch it up with the mouse, should you choose to do so. Once you're happy with your performance, you can capture it as audio onto an audio track. I'm going to mute this aux track and record enable the audio track, which I've got set up already with its proper input, and then just record. And as you can see here, we've got audio on this track. An easier way to do this in Pro Tools is to just call up an instrument track, which is a combination of MIDI and aux input, and do the same type of work, but have everything on one track instead of on a MIDI track and an aux input, which is 2 tracks. All right, so this is now playing through the instrument track. And you could do the same thing here and record audio. So let me just delete this, record enable. And you can see the audio is playing back here. One reason for recording this audio is so that you can then use the Sirin for a different sound on a different track. That leads us into the editor that comes with Sirin. Moog makes an incredibly good and useful plugin, the Sirin editor. And what's nice about this is that you have the ability to access parameters on this front panel that don't exist on the panel of the actual instrument itself. You have a preset manager, and I've got my sound here, and it's got all the other presets, and you can create and save your own patches, and then it will recall that when you call up the track. Watch this. This is nice too. So if I record enable this guy, and if I turn my mod wheel, you can see that the dial moves. And what I like about this also is that they've even thought about the shadow, which is kind of nice. You have the same effect on the envelopes for the filter and the amplifier. And as you're recording your part, all the movement you make with the knobs is recorded as MIDI information. There is one quirk in the software which I'd like to show you. So you see as I record this in, the filter knob is moving, but watch what happens when I play it back. You can easily hear the filter automation, but if you look on the GUI, you notice that the knob hasn't moved. I'm not sure whether this will be addressed in a future update, but it's something you should be aware of. By combining this software editor with the Sirin, you have a very easy to use and powerful adjunct that you can add into any DAW. The next function I'd like to look at is using Sirin as a MIDI controller for software synths. A recent update to Omnisphere added hardware integration mode, where Omnisphere becomes a virtual Sirin with all the controllers on the physical Sirin mapped to corresponding parameters on Omnisphere. There are other videos that go over this, but let's take a brief look at it and also show how you can use the knobs on the Sirin to control parameters on the other synth models and other types of sounds found in Omnisphere. So on our top track here, we have Omnisphere with a Sirin sound loaded in, and we have hardware integration mode on. And if I play the sound, right here we have our LFO. So let's turn our LFO rate up. You can see the parameters moving. Play with the resonance. You can see over here that the cutoff and the resonance is moving and the gain is moving. So that works really well. So let's pick another sound, and I've selected Lucky Fellow, which we all know what that is supposed to be. One thing I'd like to see is if I can change the waveform. Yeah, that works as well. Let me change the volume of the oscillator. It does a really good job of this. You could play your part in, go back and edit all your parameters, or you can just capture a live performance. The net effect of this is you get the experience of operating a hardware synthesizer inside of the DAW. Now let's move on to a different synth model, and we have here the OB6 by Sequential Circuits. As you can hear, this really does a great job capturing the spirit of the Oberheim sound. Play around with the filter a little bit. The resonance really sounds great on this. And the waveform still changes. While the Sirin only has about half the knobs and buttons that the OB6 does, it's still an effective controller to use in hardware integration mode with any of the synth models found there. Let's take a look at a sound like the choir in Omnisphere. I'd like to have a longer release on that. A slower attack. Turn the filter down, make it a little darker. Again, very handy, very useful, and a great way to go beyond just using the factory presets. Let's take a look at the felt piano. That's a little loud, so I think I'll turn the volume down by playing around with the oscillator levels, not the output volume. So instead of just doing some tweaks like we did with the choir sound, you can transform this into a completely different instrument with some sound design. And using these controllers makes it really, really easy. It makes it so that you really want to experiment and find some original sounds from the content that comes with Omnisphere. Again, very useful. You know, the other thing that's great about this is the Sirin is very small. So if I'm not going to be using it on a project, it's very easy for me to just lift it up and put it on the side of my desk so that it's out of the way. The third and final technique that we'll discuss today is to use the Sirin as an effects unit to process sounds by sending audio out of your DAW into Sirin, treating that sound with some of the parameters on the Sirin, and recording that back as audio into your DAW. Let's take a look at that. Inserted into this instrument track here, I have Boom, which is a virtual drum machine plugin. Let's take a listen. Boom is a really good sounding drum machine. Well, good enough anyway for our purposes. What I'd like to do here is mute this track because I have a send setup, which is pre-fader, and it's sending a copy of this audio signal out of playback 8, and that's patched into input 2 of my audio interface. If I activate record on this track and the input monitor, we should be able to hear the sound coming out of this track. Let me just open this filter up here. You can hear that by sending the audio signal through the circuitry of the Sirin, we've added a really nice analog crunch to the sound. We could turn the external input up and drive it a little bit more, and this controller here is not on the Sirin, but just in the software. That sounds great. Let me turn this down for a second, and we can play around with the filter a little bit. Turn up the resonance. Oops, little feedback there. And as you can hear, you can do some rhythmic effects there. That can all be automated. Another interesting technique is to drive the input of the seiran by boosting the output of boom. And I'll do that here by plugging in the little radiator by Soundtoys into the signal path. Another good plugin for this is the saturation knob by SoftTube, which is a free plugin. As I turn up the heat knob, you'll hear the sound getting more and more saturated. One issue to be aware of using this technique is that as you drive the input, if you play around with the filter, it's going to add a lot of distortion that's unpleasant to your low end. So what I tend to do is add an additional filter in the signal path, just like this, and you can tame that. Let's record the audio, and we can do some balancing of the levels and get a parallel processing effect. All right, I really like that. So let me go in and mute some of these things, and we have to do one audio adjustment. As you can see, the note doesn't really start because of latency right on the beat. So let me clean that up right here. Some audio editing. There we go. And now just adjust the volume of the affected track. You can see it really adds some energy to the original track. So just to summarize, a hardware unit like the Sirin, and you could probably find many other pieces of kit like this, can be a really powerful adjunct to a DAW computer-based setup. You have tactile control, you have Midi functionality, you have a great analog synthesizer, and you have a great processing unit, all in a little tiny box. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that bell to get notified. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you've got any comments, leave them down below. If you've got any techniques to share, also leave those below. And if you've got any suggestions for future videos, please leave them below. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.